Subscribe.
Upon first look at Cars for the Gamecube, you'd think this is another shameless cash grab to get the money of the kids who are hooked on that Cars hype. But don't be remiss, there is actually a game inside of that box. I picked this up originally because it was super cheap at my local GameStop, and I thought it'd be something to laugh at and then put away. However, when I actually started it up, I was surprised at the quality inside. Now, let's not mistake ourselves. Cars is still a pretty mediocre game, but there are still some real interesting ideas in here. First off, the developers went with an RPG on wheels. Yeah, that's right, Cars for the Gamecube is in fact an open world role-playing game. No joke. And it's actually pretty fun to play too. The driving feels pretty smooth. Navigation isn't perfect because at the end of the day, a car isn't going to have the same feel or precision as a human avatar, but it was fun to drive around Radiator Springs as fast as I could go without crashing. Or intentionally crashing into NPCs because the world is actually pretty decently populated. It's still nothing special in the grand scheme of things. Missions are incredibly shallow for one, it's all racing or collecting to some extent, nothing really outside of the box. Also, since they went with the RPG style, then I should talk about the story. It's Cars, that's pretty much it, but the pacing feels staggered because the loose plot is split up by arbitrary missions. I was pleasantly surprised by Cars the game, but it's still a pretty middle-of-the-road racing RPG thing.
5 out of 10.
I loved this game as a kid, first and foremost. I played it multiple times over, speeding through the levels, watching the story unfold, and absolutely rocking out to the soundtrack. Now, as I get older, I realize this game has a lot of problems. Things that people now rip this game apart for, but I can't help but give it some slack. For one, the animation is bad. Even as a kid, I thought it was weird. The voice acting isn't the best either, but I give that one more leeway because I find the corny lines and delivery endearing. I do think it looks alright for when it was released, not perfect, but still decent. I think the story is pretty good, all things considered. Of all things to rip this game on, I can see the acting, the animation, but the story I think is fine. I particularly like how each character sees the same story from a different perspective. It makes them all feel unique. Now, speaking of the characters, I generally like how all of them play. Except for Big, of course. Everyone else feels like a variation on Sonic to some extent. Therefore, none of them feel like a real chore to play. Again, except for Big. It's unfortunate that Big ends up being such a blemish on this game. His gameplay is so vastly different from everyone else than what you'd expect from a game with Sonic in the title. The worst part is that his playthrough is required to beat the game. I'm sure he wouldn't be nearly as hated if he was optional. Now, the stages are hard for me to talk about because I know a lot of them like the back of my hand. Any missteps in design have become nothing more than another obstacle to run around. If I could name something I never really look forward to, it's the casino stage for Sonic or his last stage. Final Egg goes on for too long and the ring gimmick in Casinopolis feels like a roadblock in the pace every time. Everything else feels pretty much fine. All the other characters bring that variety while still mostly being based around movement and platforming. Sonic Adventure is a bit of a mess in presentation, but I think the core of its gameplay is solid, and I have a fun time every time I decided to pick it back up.
7 out of 10!
Same disclaimer here as Adventure 1, but even more so. So many memories of this one. First watching and playing little bits of it at a friend's house, then getting it as my first GameCube game and playing it all day long. Better visuals, much needed upgraded animation, better voice acting, and even a more bangin' soundtrack. The story was bigger and more involved, but still had that goofy delivery and writing. I absolutely adore this game, but it's still not perfect, and that comes mainly down to the gameplay for me. There are less gameplay styles here than the first game, but they feel a little more separated from each other rather than being pretty closely tied to Sonic in general gameplay. I think this is a double-edged sword. For one, every character type has their own stages, which means none of them have to compensate for the others. It gives room to fully realize each type's potential. On the other hand, the divorce of these gameplay styles can give a rise to the big problem, where other sections feel too different from the game's namesake, which is why most people buy the game. Regardless of how good or bad Eggman or Knuckles' stages are, they can end up feeling like a chore because I bought a Sonic game and I want to play as or like Sonic. I agree that Sonic and Shadow stages are the best parts of this game. They're the parts that I go back to the most, but I don't think the other gameplay styles are unenjoyable. They're just different. They have their own pros and cons, and I could discuss them for ages, but not here. I had and still have so much fun with Sonic Adventure 2 every time I boot it up. In the story mode, stage select, Chow Garden, it doesn't matter. It's not perfect, but it's still a great time.
8 out of 10!
Now I put Sonic Gems collection in one package here because my critiques of them all pretty much fall under one umbrella. There's a few that stand out which I'll mention, but the rest should all fit in with what I have to say here. For one, there's a lot of content here. However, most of the list is filled with games that aren't really a big draw to me. You have the Sonic Game Gear titles, which are cool but not much to sink your teeth into, all things considered. There are also Genesis games like Vector Man 1 and 2, and the Streets of Rage games, and I assume the big draw for most people was Sonic CD. Herein lies the biggest problem with this collection on the Gamecube. These 2D games are just not fun to play on the Gamecube's controller. They weren't meant to be played with the analog stick, and the Gamecube's D-pad is mushy and unresponsive. Not a hit on those games to me, but definitely one for this collection. It makes the majority of these games a no-go for me. There are a couple games that might save it though. I spent most of my time here on Sonic R and Sonic the Fighters. Sonic R is a bit of fun, if only to see the characters actually racing on foot for once. The tracks are alright, the game looks good, but the music is bad. I heard people really like it, but I guess it's just not for me. It's also really lacking in content altogether. Sonic the Fighters is a lot of fun. There's input commands and footsies and combos like any fighter, but it's not complex to the point where it feels like a huge commitment. It's a short, fun arcade game with some of my favorite characters.
5 out of 10.
Alright, this one I don't have as many fond memories with. I really wanted to like Sonic Heroes. I've played it multiple times over the years to try to beat it, but this last time I played it for the list, I think I've finally given up. I never really got down with the team mechanic. Try as the devs might, switching characters always felt like a weird pace change. It doesn't change much in the moment, but over time it causes every stage to feel jittery in terms of pace and control. In about 30 to 45 second increments, you're racing down a line as a speed character, then platforming carefully as a flight character, then stopping to clear out enemies as a power character. It's so much stop and go as all these characters control differently, and it tires me out. Now multiply this problem by 3. Yeah, because all the teams going through the same stages with the same core gameplay problem I have makes it so much worse. It doesn't matter that I can play as Team Rose for a shorter journey because they're all required to finish the game. Then add in the strange mission setup for Team Chaotix and I'm just done. Their gameplay is the antithesis of what everyone else is doing. While the others are speeding from A to B, the Chaotix are combing every level for trinkets, and it's painfully obvious the levels weren't made with this in mind. The cherry on top is the special stages. They're a joke. I once looked up a tutorial on how to beat them and the gist of it was spam boost and pray the physics don't mess up. And they're required to finish too? No thanks. Everything else is fine, great even. It looks great, the music still slaps, and the story is a fun little romp with a nice twist at the end. The game can be fun. I have come back multiple times after all, but the process of beating it just brings out all of Sonic Heroes' worst qualities. And from now on, I'm done.
4 out of 10.
So here we have an interesting case. For some reason, my copy of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 won't recognize my memory card, meaning I can't save. So every time I boot it up, I have to start from the beginning. And I have a blast every time. I don't usually get very far, but the THPS formula is so fun, I don't care if I don't get to play all the stages. There's more techniques and skaters, including a custom character creator that I have fun messing around with if I get bored of skating for a minute. The park design feels confident and natural, and even though I only get one stage starting from the beginning, I still enjoy playing multiplayer and just skating around for a while. The music is great too. I have more nostalgia for the original soundtracks, but THPS 4's still has merits. I wish I could say more, but I can't. I don't know the full extent to the campaign, if the mission structure for the campaign ever gets rough, because I don't expect myself to beat this game in one sitting. And no, I don't like keeping my Wii on overnight. It's getting old. I can speak on the controls for a second. Something about the GameCube controller's layout made them feel less intuitive than on the N64, and I'll maintain that this is the one 3D game that's better played with a D-pad. And, well, we already know about the GameCube's D-pad. Analog isn't terrible, but not ideal.
7 out of 10.
Merry Christmas.